Good evening, you're all very welcome. I'm Timothy O'Shea, I'm the principal of the university. Tremendous pleasure to welcome you to this Nature of Knowledge lecture. Delighted to see so many philosophers from the university. Delighted that philosophers from the University of Stirling and other places have joined us. Our speaker tonight is very distinguished. Daniel Dennett received his BA in philosophy from Harvard, and then he took a DPhil in philosophy at Oxford, where he studied under Gilbert Ryle, and his studies under Ryle really set his direction. He's the Austin B. Fletcher Professor of Philosophy and co-director of the Centre of Cognitive Studies at Tufts University, and as you will all very well know, the author of many major books on evolution and consciousness. It's tremendously fitting that he be speaking here at the University of Edinburgh, fitting for three reasons. One, philosophy has been a key part of this university's activity and of its teaching from its very foundation, and remains an area which flourishes here and which we are very proud of. Secondly, this university played a key role in the Enlightenment, and in some ways it's reasonable to regard Professor Dennett as the equivalent of a contemporary Enlightenment figure. And thirdly, which follows on naturally, he is a very important public intellectual, known worldwide for debating and advancing issues which are very, very important. And this university, of course, has a tremendous history in producing and supporting public intellectuals. So I'm delighted to introduce him, and he will be speaking to the topic, religion as a natural phenomenon. Professor Dennett.
Thank you, Tim O'Shea. It's good to see you again. I'm so thrilled to be here. Just a few minutes ago, I found myself looking firsthand at the famous portrait of my hero, David Hume, which is in the principal's office. That gives us an extra special meaning to this occasion to me. Hume is one of my heroes. Another one of my heroes is Charles Darwin, of course, and some people have even gone so far as to say that I carry my hero worship a little bit far, extending even to my appearance. Now, I really don't know why anybody would say that. I don't think there's anything to it. But in any case, Darwin certainly is one of my heroes. Today I'm going to be talking about religion as a natural phenomenon with an evolutionary history. And the reason that I turned to this topic, not a topic that I had ever thought I would ever write on, was because I began to be worried about what was happening with religion in the world. It seemed to be mounting in importance in many spheres, playing a very disruptive and worrying role. And as I looked around, I realized that I hadn't the faintest idea what was going to happen with religion in the next 100 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 5 years. And I looked around to see if anybody else did, and I decided that nobody did. Just to dramatize how ignorant we are of where religion is taking us, I want to walk you through 5 scenarios. There's many others. And I just want you to think, which of these is most likely to be true? One is that, alas, the Enlightenment is over, in spite of the efforts in Edinburgh and elsewhere, and that religion is, in fact, going to sweep the planet. Here's a recent map of the religions of the world, showing how they dominate in various regions. And if religion does sweep the planet, you might want to know which religion is going to sweep the planet and go to fixation, as it were. Whichever religion it is, it will be a religion that most of the people in the world do not now adhere to. There is no majority religion, and this means there's going to be a tremendous amount of strife if that's what the future holds for us. Well, maybe that's not what's going to happen. Maybe, in spite of the recent uproar, Religion is in its death throes, as Hume, I think, and many others predicted back several hundred years ago. They were just wrong by a few hundred years. Maybe science and technology in the modern world will in fact, lead to the evaporation or extinction of religion. It's possible, I suppose, that within the lives of our grandchildren, that Vatican City will become the European Museum of Roman Catholicism. Maybe Mecca will become Disney's Magic Kingdom of Allah. This does not seem very likely, but we have to remember that the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul started off as a church and later was a mosque, and now it's a museum. Worth bearing in mind. Well, there's two hypotheses. Here's a third, that religions transform themselves into creedless moral teams. The actual creeds drop out of the running, more or less. They become vestigial. And it's the moral teamwork, the organization, the infrastructure, and perhaps the particular sense of duty. And this might be different with one religion concentrating on social justice and another concentrating on the environment and so forth. We could imagine that all that really remains that shows their religion is the pageantry, and that we have different varieties of pageantry in different colors, different songs, and sort of like sports teams. Would you want your daughter to marry a Chelsea fan? It might be rather like that. Unlikely, yes, I guess unlikely, but wished for by many, and some religions do seem to be heading in this direction. Another possibility is that religions may just diminish in prestige and visibility rather the way smoking has in recent years, and that we decide, well, yes, if you are religious, you can be elected to public office, but as long as you don't make too big a deal of it and you sort of don't smoke in public, or as long as you don't blow the smoke in our direction, it's all right. That also seems a bit unlikely. And then there's one more hypothesis that we might want to consider in addition to these four, and this is the one that, according to Newsweek magazine, is actually believed by a majority of my countrymen, and that is that Judgment Day arrives, and that Jesus Christ, God's chosen king, will destroy the world at Armageddon. Now, there's 5 hypotheses. They're all quite different, and what I want to draw to your attention is that all but one of these, at most, is wildly wrong, and nobody knows which one is right. Nobody knows. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. If they do, they've been doing an awful lot of research and keeping it very quiet. That, it would seem to me, is reason enough to want to study religion with scientific intensity, because such an important phenomenon, we should try to get a grip on it, understand it well enough so that we can predict what it's likely to do in the future and why. Now, here's a beautiful dairy cow, and the question I want to raise is, who designed it? Well, the answer, of course, is complicated, because this is an animal that's been under domestication for thousands of years, actually, and much of the design work on the dairy cow was done thousands of years earlier, hundreds of thousands of years earlier, by the process of evolution, by natural selection. Here's the aurochs, which is the pretty well established, the wild ancestor of the domesticated cattle in the world today. And aurochs were wild, as I say, and what that means is that what they were for is for themselves. Aurochs were for making more aurochs, just the way beetles are for making more beetles and palm trees are for making more palm trees. But once they became domesticated, then they were for us. And the domesticators, first unconsciously, as Darwin puts it, in the Origin of Species, he has this wonderful pedagogical transition. He goes from deliberate breeding, improvement of the breed, foresighted, deliberate breeding. Then he does what he calls unconscious selection. This is the unintended consequences of just favoring the best animal. You're not trying to change the breed. You're just favoring breeding some animals and not breeding others. The runts of the litter are just not being kept. And then, of course, before that, we have just natural selection. So we have sort of three grades of involvement in the process. Very self-conscious redesign of the animal, and certainly in the case of the dairy cow, we can see that the cow was very carefully analyzed, sort of reverse engineered, and every part of it was subjected to intense scrutiny, and whether we want to improve this bit or improve that bit, what it's good for, what the optimal arrangement is. This is very much a matter of deliberate human design and redesign. Well, now, why am I talking to you about cows? I'm supposed to be talking about religions. Well, because I want to say exactly the same thing is true of religions. Religions have evolved over thousands of years. They're actually not as old as cows. That is, the ancestry of religion only goes back maybe tens of thousands of years, not millions of years. And the evolution of religion began with, in effect, wild forms of religion, and then they became domesticated. And when they became domesticated, there was first unconscious selection of features, and later very deliberate, foresighted, carefully reasoned attempts to revise and to refine and to change the designs of religions. So what I want to suggest is that the reason that the uninformative reason of why religions have such a hold on us, why the Enlightenment was wrong, why religions have not vanished, is that they have been brilliantly designed over the eons to do just that, to have a hold over us, to be robust, wonderfully self-maintaining organizations that are designed to hold us in thrall. And the design process has an evolutionary history. In recent years, it's been under very conscious and self-conscious human, not under human control, because the best laid plans of mice and men often gang and play. But there has been the intention to revise and refine the design of religions. In other words, what I want to talk about is the project of reverse engineering religions. Looking under the hood, seeing how the parts work, seeing why they work the way they do. It's only when we've done this job well that we'll understand what we might want to do in the future to steer religions in the directions that we think are benign. If we act without information, if we engage in well-intentioned but ill-informed tinkering, we do that at our peril. Now, part of the job of getting something clearly in view is getting enough distance from it so its very familiarity doesn't blind you. And a favored trope of people who want to talk this way is to say, well, what would Martian biologists make of the planet Earth if they came here? What would they make? What would startle them? What would surprise them? What would they think was worth studying? Here's something that might very well surprise them. I don't know how well, even in the front, you can see this. Well, what is this? Is this a whale seen underwater, or is it a tongue, or maybe is it some bacteria growing in a petri dish, or some kind of mold on the edge of a root or something? No, that's not what it is. What it is approximately 1 million human beings gathered on the banks of the Ganges on one day in 2001 as seen from outer space. Perhaps the largest convocation gathering of human beings ever on the planet. That would impress the Martians. Wow, what an expensive, extravagant, extraordinary gathering of mammals in one place. Well, here's another one, maybe not quite so impressive. This is, of course, St. Peter's Square. And another one, this is Mecca. What would impress the Martian biologists is that these are extremely expensive occasions, tremendous effort, travel, preparation, rehearsal, the erection of huge buildings. These are extremely costly affairs. Why do they happen? How did this all originate? What is it for? How does it perpetuate itself? These are the questions the Martian biologists would be eager to answer. And we should try to answer them for ourselves, since our future on this planet may well depend on our getting the right answers. Well, now here's another thing that might really impress anybody. Cause for wonder. You're out in the meadow and you see an ant climbing up a blade of grass. She climbs and she climbs. If she falls, she gets back on the blade and climbs again. Climbs again, she falls, and she climbs and she climbs and she climbs until she reaches the very top of the blade of grass. And you might wonder, here's an expenditure of energy too. This is purposive behavior if I ever saw it. What on earth is the ant doing this for? What benefit accrues to the ant? Is she looking for food? Is she looking for a mate? Is she lost? Is she trying to get home? Wrong answers. In fact, no benefit at all accrues to the ant. Well, then, is this just a fluke? Yes, it's just a fluke. It's a brain fluke, a lancet fluke, Dicrocelium dendriticum, a parasitic little brainworm that has to get into the belly of a cow or a sheep in order to continue its reproductive cycle. What does it do? It commandeers a passing ant, climbs into the ant's brain, and drives it like an all-terrain vehicle up the blade of grass to a position where it is more likely to be eaten by a cow or a sheep. Spooky. It's not an isolated case. I've begun collecting some of these marvelous cases of manipulative symbiotic relationships, manipulative host manipulation by parasites. Here's another one, sort of fascinating, very similar actually. Toxoplasma gondii is a parasite that infects mice. And in order to continue its life cycle, it has to get, in order to reproduce, it has to get into the belly of a cat. Well, now, what would you do if you were in a mouse and you wanted to get into a cat? You would turn the mouse into Mighty Mouse. Make the mouse bold, fearless, so it runs out in the open. That's what mice do when they are infested with Toxoplasma gondii. They're more likely that way to be eaten by a cat. I could give you other examples, but two we'll have to do. There's not that much time. What we have in these cases, we have a hijacker, the parasite that infects the brain and induces suicidal behavior on behalf of a cause other than one's own genetic fitness. Gosh, that's scary. Does anything like that ever happen to us? No. Well, I want to remind you that the Arabic word Islam means submission. It means surrender of self-interest to the will of Allah. But Islam is not alone. In Christianity, we have the same theme. This is a not very good photograph of a parchment page, music manuscript page done mid-16th century. I found this in a Paris bookstall about 50 years ago. And the text is interesting. What it says is, Semen est verbum Dei sator autem Christus, omnis qui audit eum manebit in eternum. By the way, I think you can maybe make out, if you're up close, that the Christus is spelled with two Greek letters first, chi and rho, and then the scribe has put an R after the rho. This is a mutation in the copying, in the mindless copying of this text. And it's also, of course, showing how a text gets translated from one language into another. So what does that mean? It means the Word of God is a seed, and the sower of the seed is Christ, and all who hear it will have eternal life. That's the quid pro quo. Well, this idea of planting the seed is a little different from the idea of infesting the brain with a parasite. But in fact, Christianity very often does adopt the language and the imagery that Islam uses as well. Consider these words. The heart of worship is surrender. And these words, surrendered people obey God's word even if it doesn't make sense. Now, who said those? These are the recent words of Pastor Rick Warren, the author of a book called The Purpose-Driven Life. This is an evangelical Christian book which has sold 30 million copies in the United States since it was published a few years ago. This is one of the most influential religious figures in America today. Other religions as well have similar imagery. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is that although, as I've presented these ideas, they seem repugnant, even shocking, at the same time, I want to suggest, if you think about them slightly differently, you recognize this is nothing to be appalled by. This is, in fact, the key to our specialness as human beings, that we have ideas to die for. Not just the ideas of Islam or the ideas of Christianity. But think in the 20th century, for instance, how many people laid down their lives for the idea of communism, or democracy, or justice. Probably everybody in this room has a recent ancestor who laid down his life for freedom, or democracy, or justice. I live in Massachusetts. The state just to the north of Massachusetts is New Hampshire. And the license plate of the state of New Hampshire says, "Live free or die." This is the motto of my neighboring state. Makes the point unmistakably clear. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the moose can't contemplate that fact, can't endorse that ringing patriotic motto. And that's an important biological difference between us and the moose, between us and every other species of the planet. We are the only species that has the capacity to set aside our genetic imperative and decide that we're going to live for, and if necessary, die for, furthering the prospects of some idea. This is what makes us human. This is the very source of our wonderful, complicated difference from the rest of the biosphere. I look around the room here and I see there's people that are my age. There are no doubt a lot of parents. How many parents do we have here? How many grandparents? Oh, okay. Now I want to know, how many of you think that the most important thing in life is having more grandchildren than your next door neighbor? I don't see any hands up. In other words, maximizing your progeny is not the summum bonum of your life. Not a single one of you thinks this is the most important thing. This is your raison d'etre, your summum bonum. I want to point out that that makes us weird. Every other species on the planet, that's their summum bonum. Everything they do is designed to further that interest, and they are unable to conceive of any alternatives. The salmon struggling upstream to spawn, they can't think to themselves, "Oh, never mind, I think I'd rather go learn French, or I think I'll devote myself to spreading the word on some topic." No other species, only us. We're the ones that can live for an idea, that can die for an idea. It's ideas, not worms, that hijack our brains. These are ideas that can copy themselves, that can make us copy them. Not only rehearsing them in our own brains over and over, but spreading them to our friends and our neighbors and our family, and populating the world with many copies of these ideas. This, of course, is the idea of memes that Richard Dawkins first introduced in his famous book, The Selfish Gene, which appeared just 30 years ago. Dawkins pointed out that evolution, cultural evolution, goes on in a medium, not in the medium of genes, but in the medium of ideas. and that ideas, just like genes, replicate and can be assigned fitness. Some replicate better than others in the great competition for space in people's brains. So memes are not any old idea. If you just have an idea in your head of, a yellow chair in the corner, that's not a meme. It's only a meme if it replicates many times and if it gets passed on and spread so that pretty soon everybody is thinking of that yellow chair. The idea of a yellow submarine wasn't a meme until the Beatles made it one. And of course they didn't make it one. It was all the people who sang it and copied it that made it a meme. Ideas are more like viruses than like living things. Viruses aren't alive, but they do have an evolutionary history because they are capable of provoking their own reproduction by entering into a cell. My definition of a virus is a string of nucleic acid with attitude. It's not alive, and it has attitude in the sense that there's just something about it. We can actually figure that out now. We can reverse engineer it, understand how this works, that provokes its own replication when it gets inside a cell. It commandeers the reproductive machinery of that cell to make more copies of it. And if it does that better than its competitive viruses, then it flourishes. That's how viruses evolve. And Dawkins suggested that's how cultural ideas can evolve as well. The most obvious case are words. Sometimes people ask me, well, I'm not even sure memes exist. What are they made of? They're not made of DNA. Well, what are words made of? What are words made of? How many people believe that there are words? Do you believe that there are words? I do. But they're not animal, vegetable, or mineral. They're not made out of sound, and they're not made out of ink. They're actually very subtle, complicated sort of behavioral recipes. Recipes for speaking, recipes for putting them together in combination with others. And they have evolutionary histories. The words of French are descended mostly from the words of Latin, for instance. And that's a process that was not deliberate or foresighted or planned. Words have their own fitness. Some words go extinct, other words proliferate like mad. So, do memes exist? Well, words exist, and words are memes that can be pronounced. There's all the memes that can't be pronounced, too, like fashions or ways of carving or wearing your baseball hat backwards. Or there's lots of other memes, but the ones that can be pronounced are the ones we call words. And it's not just words, but larger clumps of words. Here's a quote from a theologian, Hugh Piper. If survival of the fittest has any validity as a slogan, then the Bible seems a fair candidate for the accolade of the fittest of texts. Fittest in what sense? In the sense that there's more copies of it than any other text. It has simply out-reproduced all the other texts around the world, translated into many different languages, found in many hotel bedrooms. There's just more Bibles than any other text. That makes it the fittest of texts. That's the meme's eye perspective. Notice that it is usefully independent of the question of whether the text is good or true or useful. That may well be. I think the Boy Scout Manual is a very useful book, and there's many copies of it, and it probably survives as well as it does because it's so useful. But other memes survive for all sorts of different reasons. And their fitness is a measure of their fitness, not their contribution to our fitness. And besides, everybody in this room has already acknowledged that their own biological fitness is not that important to them. They don't care if they are biologically fitter than their neighbors. That's not the point of living. So you certainly shouldn't care whether or not any memes make you biologically fitter. Maybe we used to care. We don't care much anymore. Human culture is itself one of the fruits on the tree of life. I want to just draw your attention to the tree of life. I'm sorry, those of you in the back will not be able to make this out at all. It doesn't look much like a tree even from up close, unless you realize this is a tree as seen as a bird's eye view. You're looking down on the top of the tree. In the center, we see the putative root. There's controversy about just where the trunk of the tree and the roots should be, but it shows the three main branches: the bacteria, the archaea, and the eukarya. And we're, of course, a eukarya. We're a eukaryote. We're made of complex eukaryotic cells. All the multicellular life forms are on this lower branch. And the artist who drew this has put us with two of our close neighbors on the tree of life, right out at the tip of the branch of eukaryotes. This is Coprinus, Homo, and Zea. What are they? Well, Homo is us, Coprinus is mushrooms, and Zea is corn. Close cousins. On the tree of life, we're actually relatively close to them compared with most of the rest of the things in the biosphere. We're rather different from mushrooms and corn, and even from all other vertebrates and from all other mammals, in that we have human culture. There are some other mammalian and bird species that have elements of culture. We know, for instance, that beaver dams and the Hoover Dam both require some small element, at least, of cultural transmission. Beavers don't get all their know-how in engineering of dams through their genes. Some of it is culturally transmitted, offspring copying parents and other members of the group. So here are two different fruits of the tree of life. They are both artifacts made by mammals, castor in one case and Homo in the other. A spider web is one of the artifacts made by a living form. The World Wide Web, or the power grid, is an artifact made by another species. It's important to recognize that although there are wildly different methods involved in the production of these artifacts, they are both artifacts made by living things, and hence they have a place, as in effect, as fruits on the tree of life. On the left, we see a bird's nest. On the right, we see an ode to a nightingale. Now, indeed, they are very different as artifacts. They both have an evolutionary history. The poet can't write the ode to a nightingale without the words, doesn't make the words himself. The words have to be gathered and learned, and they have an evolutionary history of their own. And the style of the poem, the fact that it is an ode, the fact that it has the rhyme pattern it has, and so forth, these have a cultural evolutionary history of their own. This is not to say that looking through Darwinian glasses at poems is the only way, but it is an important way, and one way in which even poetry should be looked at for its evolutionary history. And the poetry and other forms of religion I would include in that as well. And these all get underway. All human culture gets underway without any insightful design or designer to prime the pump. It gets underway by natural selection itself. Now, in my book, I give several chapters are devoted, the middle of the book is devoted to providing a somewhat speculative sketch of a theory of the evolution of religion, how it came to exist in the first place. I don't claim or pretend that it is the truth, that I have confirmed it. It is speculative. But the idea was to give a sketch of the best theory I could based on what research has been done, and so that people who initially might think, well, I just can't imagine what an evolutionary theory of the origins of religion would be, now they can imagine it. They may not like the theory, they may think it's false. Fine, replace it with a better theory, one that is better confirmed by the evidence. But recognize that this is a valuable task to engage in, and if one theory isn't quite right, then fix the parts that are wrong, and then we'll have a much better theory. I don't have time to present to you a full version of it. I'm just going to give you a few of the key features of it. It starts with an instinct that we share with other mammals. It's an instinct, for instance, that you might see in your dog. If your dog was sort of snoozing by the hearth and some snow slid off the roof and landed with a loud thud outside the window, and your dog would jump up and growl and bark and look around. And basically the dog is asking, who's there? What do you want? It's looking for an agent in the world. This hyperactive agent detection device, as Justin Barrett calls it, is something that we share with, basically with all mammals. It's a very useful evolutionary habit to have, the habit of looking for agents whenever there's something puzzling or surprising going on. Not necessarily startling. If it won't rain, and it won't rain, and it won't rain, you can start looking for an agent to blame for that, or maybe one to appeal to ask for rain to come. That's another phenomenon in life that would lead to the positing of an invisible agent that plays a role in your life. The suggestion of not just me, but actually a number of theorists, is that what this does, and this is found in every culture that's ever been looked at, is a rather large population of local imps, goblins, fairies, gods, leprechauns, invisible supernatural agents that are deemed to play in one role or another in the local culture. Now, how did that happen? The suggestion is that in the dog, when the hyperactive agent detection device fires, the dog looks around for a few seconds, and then basically this evaporates. It goes back to sleep. But when a person does it, because of our language and because we have these echo chambers for brains, a little rehearsal is set up. So you're out in the woods and crackle, crackle. What's that? Oh my God! Who said that? What? Did that tree just talk? Oh my God! A talking tree. Was that a talking tree? I don't think so. No, couldn't be a talking tree. Oh no, could it be a talking tree? A talking tree? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 little rehearsals. 6 little generations of the talking tree idea. Call your neighbor over. Hey, I think there's a talking tree. He says, a talking tree? Yes, a talking tree. We now have 10, 11, 12. The idea is having offspring. Pretty soon the whole village is talking about the talking tree. That's how a meme is born. One thing to understand about evolution, cultural evolution as well as genetic evolution, is that evolution is all about things that almost never happen. Mutation almost never happens, but evolution depends on the amplification of the effects of mutation. Every birth and every lineage is a potential speciation event. Not 1 in a trillion is. But that's the source of all the variety on the planet. Every time your hyperactive agent detection device fires, and you create a momentary, off-the-wall hunch, I think there's a goblin out there. Let's suppose, not that 99 times out of 100, let's suppose that 999 times out of 1,000, that's the end of it. Evaporates, dies. You don't even remember it for 5 minutes. But every now and then, one comes along that gets rehearsed by you, and rehearsed. And once it's been rehearsed a few times, it's going to be rehearsed a few more times, and then it's going to be spread, and now we have a lineage. It won't take long before these rare replications lead to a population explosion of sorts, and now they're going to compete for rehearsal time in brains, because that's limited. So we have a population explosion with competition for a limited resource. That is time and space in people's brains. Only the unforgettable ones are going to survive. The ones that are memorable, that are unforgettable, that you can't get out of your head. So those are going to be the winners of this tournament, this replication tournament in the brains of our ancestors. Now, what are the winners for? I ask this curious question because I have found that when I tell people I'm working on an evolutionary theory of religion, of the origins of religion, they say, oh, that's a good idea. Yes, I've often wondered what religion is for. It's got to be for something. After all, every human population we've ever looked at, every tribe on every continent, we've always found some sort of religion. It's a universal. It's got to be good for something. And I say, well, yes, it's true that it's a ubiquitous feature, but it doesn't follow that it's got to be good for something. What's the common cold for? Every human group that's ever been studied has it. What's it for? It's for itself. It survives because it can. It just happens to be able to exploit human hosts and spread and spread and spread. It's not for anything but itself. And that's what the original population of supernatural agents was for. They were for occupying the minds that they find themselves in. And that's all. They have their own fitness, independently of whether they're doing us any good. Some of them may be doing us harm, some of them may be doing us a lot of good, and some of them may be neutral. We want to start from a position of neutrality, which says these are all three possible. This is, in evolutionary terms, we talk about symbionts coming in three varieties. There's the parasites proper, which are harmful, fitness lowering. There are the mutualists that are beneficial, fitness enhancing, like, for instance, in your gut, many of the flora in your gut are largely, you couldn't live without them. They are essential to your life. So you certainly wouldn't want to get rid of them. By the way, just while we're thinking about this, as you sit there, you are composed of, by latest count, roughly 100 trillion cells. What percentage of those do you suppose are human cells? That is, Homo sapiens eukaryotic cells with a human genome. What percentage? About 10%. 9 out of 10 of the cells that are where you're sitting in your chair there, 9 out of 10 of them are not human cells. They have their own DNA. They are symbiont visitors, and they fall in all three categories. Most of them are not very fitness reducing. That's how you manage to be here. You're not at home dying. You're ambulatory. Some of them are moderately fitness reducing, pain in the neck, a bother, athlete's foot, things like that. Some of them you couldn't live without. So don't be disgusted by your symbionts. They outnumber you, and most of them are at least harmless. I want to say the same thing about all the cultural symbionts that infest your brain. Some of them are wonderful. You couldn't live without them. Some of them are horrible, but you can't get rid of them. And then there's the ones that neither here nor there. And they all have their own fitness. That's what the memes perspective gives you. Here's a riddle, then. How are spoken words and folk songs like squirrels, rats, pigeons, and barn swallows? I want you to think about this for a minute. Not written words, but spoken words, folk songs. Folk songs, I mean real folk songs, not written by Woody Guthrie folk songs, but maybe child ballads would do it. And the answer is that they're not domesticated, but wild. These are species, squirrels, rats, house mice, pigeons, barn swallows. These are species that are not domesticated, but that have evolved by natural selection to live in close proximity with us, to exploit aspects of human ecology for their own benefit. We don't particularly protect them. We don't need them. We don't own them. We don't worry. They're just around. But they do very well. Oddly enough, I want to say the same thing is true of spoken language. Languages don't need guardians. They've got them aplenty. There are grammarians and scolds and usage mavens and people who write columns for the newspaper about whether or not you should say ain't, or whether some new idiom is abhorrent and should be banished. But languages survive quite well without these people. They are, strictly speaking, unnecessary, however entertaining they may be at times. So languages, I'm saying, are sort of wild memes that have grown up around us, and they seem to be extremely fitness-enhancing to us. Language has taken us to great heights in the fitness department. But many of the memes that compose language are not themselves, in effect, domesticated. Well, let's talk about domestication for a moment. How clever of sheep to acquire shepherds. What a smart move from the fitness point of view that was. What they did is they outsourced all their problems, their protection from predators, food finding, even their health maintenance. The cost of this was a small loss of free mating and the diminution of their brains. Sheep are pretty stupid. They're stupid because they can be, and brains are expensive. Wild sheep are much smarter and have bigger brains because they haven't outsourced all their problems. Now, this was a clever move for sheep because domesticated sheep, it's like Bibles. Domesticated sheep's number in the hundreds of millions. Their nearest wild relatives you could probably carry off in a few arcs. So it was a great fitness-enhancing move, but it wasn't cleverness on the part of the sheep. The sheep are stupid. The cleverness was on the part of evolution. Francis Crick once, as a joke, articulated what he calls Orgel's second rule, named after his brilliant colleague Leslie Orgel, and that is that evolution is cleverer than you are. Now, this is not an endorsement of intelligent design by Francis Crick, needless to say. And in fact, if you understand Orgel's second rule correctly, you understand what is fraudulent. I use the word advisedly. What is fraudulent about the intelligent design movement? Because there's an equivocation on the word design. The products of evolution are brilliant, brilliantly designed. The process of design that produces those products is not itself brilliant or foresighted or intelligent at all. It is purposeless and mechanical and without any foresight. However, it is amazingly well suited to produce brilliant designs. And these designs have rationales. I want to say that the same thing is going to be true. What's true of sheep is also true of the wild memes of religion. They got themselves domesticated. They acquired stewards who devoted their lives to their flourishing. They were not just the shepherds of people, they were the shepherds of the ideas. And here they used their own intelligence to further the welfare of the ideas that they had domesticated and made their own. Now, this changes everything. This changes everything on the evolutionary landscape because whereas before you had memes that were just for themselves, now you have memes that are for us. So what are we going to use them for? Well, here are some uses of domesticated God memes. One of my favorites is an idea that was brilliantly presented by the late Julian Jaynes in his classic, sort of cult classic book, The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. Jaynes proposed that when our ancestors began living in larger and more complicated societies, larger groups of people, they found that decision-making was a very difficult and fraught behavior. Few things more anxiety-provoking than not being able to decide what to do next or what to think about next. And what they did, not knowing what they were doing, was they cast about for some way of getting off the dime, of making a move. And so they hit upon all sorts of rituals of decision-making, throwing lots, auguries, cutting open fowls and looking at their entrails, pouring melted wax into water, looking at the clouds, sacrificing virgins to see which way the smoke blows. All of these elaborate rituals were invented by people who didn't really know what they were doing. This is unconscious selection, creating rituals that permitted them, in effect, to ask their departed ancestors what to do next. And there are many reasons why this is a really good idea, even if you don't understand why. For one thing, if what you decide to do next turns out badly, you can blame your ancestor, who can't talk back. But it's a great way of just getting you up and running. After all, flipping a coin is okay if you're trying to decide whether to eat those berries. If you're going to decide whether to go to war or whether to marry this woman, it's just a bit too, flippant. You need something more powerful to hold you, to hold your resolve. And if, as Jane suggested, our ancestors had a real problem with resolve, any ritual that would simply give them backbone, that would give them confidence in their own decision so they could execute it and keep everybody in the group on the same path, would be a valuable trick to have in your kit. One that I explore in some length in my book is McLennan's suggestion that shamanic healing rituals played a key role in just about all religions, all folk religions, and that the shamans designed rituals which were basically hypnotic induction. And that hypnotic induction actually does provide medical benefits. It provides placebo effects, it provides for analgesia, and that if you weren't susceptible to hypnotic induction in those days, you didn't have any health insurance. So there was selection for susceptibility to hypnotic rituals. This would be a case of cultural evolution, the practices of the shaman, and genetic evolution co-evolving, working together. Is that implausible? No, not at all, actually. We already know of a well-studied case, and that is, back to our cows and sheep, we know that lactose tolerance in adulthood in us evolved genetically in response to the culturally evolved practice of dairy herding. How many of you people in this room are lactose intolerant as adults? Are there any? There's a few. If you're lactose intolerant as an adult, you are a normal mammal. We're the only species of mammal that can digest milk after infancy. When animals are weaned, the gene for the enzyme for digesting raw milk, for digesting lactose, turns off. It is superannuated in us. That gene has evolved to provide us with this really infantile capacity throughout our lives, but only in those lineages where dairy herding was in the cultural ancestry. This is pretty well established. Something similar could soon be established about differences in susceptibility to ritual, for instance. Then, of course, there's everybody's idea of using God memes as surrogate police. What do I mean? I'll tell a little story about a town in Maine, near where my farm is, where when you enter town there's a sign that says, welcome to Brooksville, and then it says, your speed controlled by radar. And somebody asked the selectman, gee, that must be pretty expensive for a little town like this. He says, no, it's about $5 actually. I just got a piece of plywood and some white paint and some black paint and wrote the sign and put it up, that's all. Works just fine. You don't have to actually be there to play the role of the surrogate policeman. You just have to be believed to be there. So what I'm suggesting is that organized religions, the religions of today, we also have wild religions today, tribal religions, sometimes called primitive religions. But the organized religions of today descended from folk religions, which were wild. When we became conscious, deliberate stewards of our ideas, this changed everything. Now, as I said before, evolution comes up with brilliant designs, and these designs have rationales. Brilliant rationales, but they don't have to be in anybody's head. Dicrocelium dendriticum, the brain fluke, doesn't understand why it is driving that ant up the blade of grass. It's stupid. It's got the IQ, roughly, I would guess, of a carrot. doesn't even have a brain, really. It's just the beneficiary of this brilliant design. Let's look at a case a little closer to us, the cuckoo. The cuckoo, as you know, is a parasite. Cuckoos do not make their own nests. The mother cuckoo, when she's ready to lay her egg, finds a likely host pair with their ready-made nest with the eggs already in it. She waits till they fly off. She darts down, lays her egg in the host nest, and departs, never to return. The hosts come back, and in due course, the cuckoo chick hatches, typically before the other eggs. Oh, by the way, the cuckoo mother may sometimes, when she layers her egg, she may push one of the other eggs out. That's just in case the hosts can count. But in any case, once the fledgling cuckoo hatches, it engages in the most obviously purposive behavior you can imagine, tries to push the other eggs out of the nest. I want to show you this. I've got it on a clip here, and I think I can show it to you. We won't have the sound, but maybe we're not going to be able to do that. I don't know why. Let's try again. There we go. So this is a host. She's sitting on her nest, but what's going on underneath her? Whoa, look out. What's this? One of her chicks is hatched. So she sits down again, and everything seems to be well, but wait a minute. Whoop, there goes one. Oh, there goes another. Yeah. Whoa. Throwing them out. What's going on? Well, there's the cuckoo chick inside, getting all the food. Now, that is certainly a brilliant stratagem that has evolved. Who benefits? The cuckoo does, but the cuckoo doesn't know. The cuckoo is an innocent little featherless fledgling. Happily, the cuckoo doesn't understand the rationale. Many of the ploys of organized religions, I try to show in the book, are similarly clever stratagems that work to benefit the fitness of the religions. And the people who engage in these stratagems can be, in effect, as innocent as the cuckoo. But in fact, since they have larger brains than the cuckoo, they can also understand the rationales. They can come to understand the rationales, and they might even come to feel a little bit ashamed of their use of some of these ploys that they start out using in all innocence. When folk religions became organized religions, there was a shift from the free-floating rationales of natural selection to the represented rationales. Now we're getting into the world of religious leaders, priests, imams, and so forth, trying to redesign their religious institutions to make life easier for themselves and to improve the robustness of the religion. And of course, sometimes they made big mistakes. Sometimes they designed their religions right into extinction. Why? Orgel's second rule. Evolution is cleverer than you are. When you start tampering with something, if you don't get it right, evolution may punish you with extinction. But nevertheless, the rationales of the stewards are responsive to an entirely new set of goals, to represented goals, just like the goals of animal domesticators. Many of the features of that cow are not for the benefit of the cow. They're for our benefit. And a similar design rationale can be found in many of the features of religions.